Today is going to be 61-1, and we're going to take a look at polynomial division. So today we're going to divide a polynomial using long division and synthetic division. So a few things to kind of clarify before we move on. If you guys remember, so far what we know about a polynomial is things like the end behavior, right? How the directions that it's going to move, etc. We talked about multiplicity and the zeros of a polynomial, and we kind of examined all those different things. But one thing, if you guys remember, when we sketched a polynomial, it was always factored. Right? It was like in some sort of form like this. And from there, we were able to determine how to sketch the polynomial. But now suppose we wanted to find the zeros of this polynomial. Now if I set this equal to 0, how do I find the zeros? Well, we know that we can factor, right? Factoring is a way that we can find the zeros, but how would I factor this? Well, maybe I could try and take a look at a graph. Okay, well, I know that my zeros are here, but what about here and here? How would I find those zeros there? And so, despite all of the factoring techniques that we've learned so far in this previous math class, this equation is going to stop us at every turn. And so, we have to know or learn other ways to factor this polynomial. Now, one of the ways that we're going to be able to find them is going to be by dividing. And so to be able to use polynomial division, it's basically our tool or our ability to be able to factor a polynomial. So now if you remember from Algebra 2, if I divide this function by, let's just say, x minus 2, this is the work that it shows. I'm going to go through that very shortly. But essentially, because my remainder is 0 here, I know it divides into it evenly. And so I could take this piece, write it here, and this piece, and write it here, and I can write it out as a series of factors. And so dividing it by that x by x minus 2, I get this statement here. And so I know in the future we're going to think, well, wait, why did I know to divide by x minus 2? Like, where did that come from? We're going to learn that. We're eventually going to get to the ability to find what values that I need to go through and divide. Right now we're not focusing on that. Right now we're just focusing on how to divide. So soon in the future we will find these in the future. But for right now we're just focusing on how to divide. So with polynomial division, suppose d of x and p of x are non-zero polynomials where the degree of p is greater than or equal to the degree of d. There exist two unique polynomials, q of x and r of x, such that p of x equals this d of x times q of x plus r of x, meaning that when I divide a polynomial, so if I take this and I divide it, I can write it out as a series of factors of these two polynomials being multiplied with my remainder being added at the very end. Now sometimes when our remainder is 0, well, it's just going to be plus 0, and I don't necessarily have a remainder there. So that's something to be aware of. Now all this statement does is it implies that we're able to write our polynomial as a type of factored form after we divide. That's crucial. After we divide, we can write our polynomial in a type of factored form. So the first type of division that we're going to look at is going to be polynomial long division. And so let's say if I want to divide x to the third plus 2x squared minus 13x minus 6 by x minus 3. Now what we're going to do is think of it like typical long division. What if I said 72 divided by 6? How would I divide that? So you want to set up the problem first. So I'm going to set this up. And so now when I want to divide, what we're going to do is, remember here I divide 6 goes into 7 how many times? In this case 1. Well, I'm going to do that here. X goes into x cubed how many times? And so if you need to see what that's going to be off to the side, go ahead and write it off to the side. So x goes into x cubed, x squared times. Then we took this 1 and we multiplied it by the 6 and I wrote it below. So I'm going to take this x squared, but I have two terms. So I'm going to take that x squared and multiply it with both of those values and write it below. So x squared times x is x cubed. X squared times negative 3x gives me minus 3x. Now back to our drawing up here, I'd have to subtract that 6 there. right? We're subtracting, and so then that's going to give me 1. Well, we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to subtract. So if I subtract, x cubed minus x cubed is going to cancel out. 2x squared minus, now negative 3, well the negative is a positive, so 2 and then plus 3 is going to give me 5x squared. Now back to our other drawing, I have to bring down the 2, and so we're going to do the same thing here. I need to bring down that minus 3x. And so I'm going to repeat. X goes into 5x squared, so this is 5x squared over x, and so that's going to give me 5x. And so once again, I need to take that value, just like what I would do here. I take this 5x and I need to multiply it through. So the 5x times x is going to give me 5x squared. 5x times negative 3 gives me negative 15x. Then I need to subtract. So 5x squared minus 5x squared is 0. Then negative 13x, negative and negative is a positive. So negative 13x plus 15x gives me 2x. And then bring down the minus 6. Once again, x goes into 2x, so this is 2x over x. So I need to write that out. So 2x over x, the x's cancel out, and so I'm left with 2. And so then I take that 2 and I multiply it through. 2 times x gives me 2x. 2 times negative 3 gives me negative 6. We're subtracting, so that negative is going to distribute through, and so 2x minus 2x cancels out. Negative 6, negative is positive, so negative 6 plus 6, that also cancels out, and so I get 0. So now to write my answer, I can write this as x squared plus 5x plus 2, and then I get x minus 3. And that's going to be my answer. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to set up the problem, which is what I did here, and so I'm going to rewind this. So I set up the problem, and then step 2, I divide the first term into the first term, so x goes into x cubed, x squared times. Step 3, distribute the top with the divisor and right under the correct term, so x squared times x gives me x cubed, x squared times negative 3 gives me negative 3x squared. Then change the signs or subtract, so then when I subtract, that cancels out. Negative is a positive, so 2 plus 3x gives me 5x squared. Bring down the next value, repeat from step 2. So first term into first term, so that's going to give me 5x. Step 3, distribute. So if I distribute those through, it gives me 5x squared minus 15x. Then step 4, subtract. 5x squared minus 5x squared is 0. Negative 13 minus negative, so that's going to be positive 2. Bring down the next value, repeat from step 2. X goes into 2x 2 times. 2 times x is 2x. 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. Subtract. And so that's going to give me a 0. And so interpreting my answer, this value here, that times this, I have divided my polynomial. So the first thing I do here is I set up the problem. So I get x cubed minus x squared plus 1, negative 5x to the 5th plus 7x to the 3rd minus x. Now there's one thing that we have to be made aware of. There's going to be a chance here in which I might get an x to the 4th, or I get an x to the 3rd, or an x squared. Well, I don't have an x to the 4th, and I don't have an x squared here. So what I need to do is you need to make sure that you go through and you put the placeholders. So plus 0x to the 4th, then plus 7x to the 3rd, plus 0x squared minus x, and then plus 0. So now when I multiply this through, it says divide the first term into the first term. And so dividing those through, I'm going to get negative x squared. So then step 3, distribute the top with the divisor. So that means I distribute this all the way through. So that's going to give me negative x to the 5th, and now positive x to the 4th, and then a minus x squared. Step 4, subtract and change the signs. So that's going to give me a 0, a negative and a positive here. That gives me a negative. Negative gives me a positive. That's going to get brought down. That should get brought down. So now going back to step 2, first term and first term, so divide those. I'm going to get minus x. So now multiplying those through, negative x times x cubed gives me negative x to the fourth. Negative x times negative x squared gives me a positive x to the third. Negative x and 1 gives me a negative x. So now step 4, subtract. So those will cancel out. So I get a 0, negative, and a positive. That's going to give me 6x to the third. And then negative and a negative, that gives me a positive, so that's going to give me 0. That gets brought down, that's x squared. So now, multiplying these through, I'm going to get x squared, x cubed goes into 6x cubed, that's going to go into 6 times. I'll do a different color, so that's going to be plus 6. So 6 times x cubed gives me 6x cubed. 6 times negative x squared, so negative 6x squared, and then 6 and 1 gives me positive 6. So now remember, we're subtracting, so that's step 4. That negative gets distributed through, so I'm going to get a 0. Negative is a positive, so that's a positive 7x squared, and then I get a minus 6, because 0 minus 6. So now writing out my answer, I'm going to get, I'll change the color again, let's do purple. I'm going to get negative x squared minus x plus 6 times x cubed minus x squared plus 1, and then I have my remainder, so I'm going to say plus my remainder, which is 7x squared minus 6. I didn't have enough room to fit it, so that's why I wrote it there on the bottom. But that's going to be my answer there. So first step, I need to set up the problem. And so now setting up the problem, divide the first term into the first term, so I get 3x cubed. So that's going to be 3x to the fourth over x. And so now I need to distribute the top with the divisor, so I distribute the top with those two values. I get that. Then I need to change the signs or subtract, and so those will always cancel out. And then a negative and a negative gives me a positive, negative 4x cubed. And so now bring down the next value. Now repeat from step 2. So x goes into negative 4x to the third, negative x squared times. Distribute the top here. This gives me a plus 8x squared. Change the sign, so subtract. So negative is a positive, so those will cancel out. Negative and a positive, so that will give me 4x squared. Bring down the next value. X goes into 4x squared 4x times. 4x times x gives me 4x squared. 4x times negative 2 gives me negative x. Subtract, step 4. So that cancels out. Negative is a positive, so I get minus 7x. Bring down the next value. X goes into minus 7x, negative 7 times. Multiply it back through. And when I subtract, I get negative 8 as my remainder. So then writing my answer, I'm going to get 3x cubed minus 4x squared plus 4x minus 7. And then I have that x minus 2, and then now plus my remainder, so minus 8. And so that's going to be my answer. So now let's talk about synthetic division. Now when our divisor is a linear factor in the form of x minus c, now what I mean by that is this highest power is degree of 1, and we're just adding or subtracting a number. We're just adding or subtracting a number here. I can write it in the form of this synthetic division. It means I'm just allowed to be able to divide it with this synthetic division. So the first thing that I can do is I can set up the problem. Now notice what I'm going to put here, and when I say set up the problem, we're going to put c here, we're going to put the coefficients here, and then we put this line on below. So when I do that, we're going to follow this pattern. We're going to add straight down, and then we're going to multiply these two values together. So we're going to multiply those two values together, and it's going to bring us to that next box here, 3. Add straight down, so I get 5. Multiply, I get the next value. Add straight down, multiply, add. Now we perform the synthetic division. Now I have to spend time to interpret my answer. So this is going to be my remainder, my constant, this is my x, and this is my x squared. So I get x squared plus 5x plus 2. So now, writing out what my polynomial would be, I would say that this is going to be x squared plus 5x plus 2, and then times x minus 3. And so that's going to be my answer. So the first thing that I did here is I set up the problem. Remember, you put whatever c is here, and then you write the coefficients. Step 2, you add straight down. You multiply for the next value. Step 4, you're going to repeat those 2 steps. Add straight down, multiply, add, all the way until you're finished. Step 5, write the polynomial backwards, right? So remainder, constant, x squared. So that's what I have left over, but then I can write it as my answer in this factored form here. Next one. So the first thing I can do is I can set up the problem. So I'll put my c, my coefficients. I get 3, -2, and 1. So the first thing I can do is add straight down, multiply, add, multiply, add. So now working backwards, I get my remainder, my constant, this is my x. So writing out my polynomial, I can say 3x plus 1 times x minus 1, and then plus 2 for my remainder. Next one is setting up the problem. So here's my c. Now writing this out, here's my x cubed, but I don't have an x squared. You cannot forget your placeholders. So then I'm going to add a 0 for my x squared, 2 for the x, and then -3. So now we just follow the same pattern. Step 2, add straight down. Step 3, multiply, add, multiply, add, multiply, and then add straight down. Okay, now working backwards, step 5, this is my remainder, my constant, my variable squared. So my answer is going to be 4x squared plus 12x plus 38. And it's going to be times that x minus 3, and then add my remainder. So add 111 to it. So that's how we do synthetic division. So today we learned both long division and synthetic division. So if you guys have any other questions, please leave them in the comments.